Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. How many of you have one of these cups with you right now? I'd like you to take a look at it and notice that it says sip hole. I had never known how to use a cup before I came here today. So that was, thank you. Yeah, if I hadn't been here, I wouldn't have known. That's very good. Okay, the topic, as you know, is lost. We are here today. I'm looking forward to talking with you about this. And I have to confess that I am not perhaps the best person to help you become unlost. The best example of this is my career as a land surveyor. First of all, land surveyors are the people who go out and find the corner of your property or lay out your house where it's going to be. I did this for several years, and one time when doing it, I actually surveyed the wrong property twice before I got it right on the third try. And this might be slightly more embarrassing, my brother always had to tell me which way was north when we got to a piece of property. Now, that is a story I told Olivia, and Olivia said, well, the topic is lost, and I said, okay. I went to the website to remind myself when this is, and what I noticed on this web page is that it is only part of a series on Lost, and I thought, oh no, Olivia has decided I can't help you become unlost, so now it's going to be a series because other people will take care of you. So I thought I've got to come up with deep, deep thoughts about being lost, and here's what I know. First of all, my surveying career, it taught me two things. Number one, if you're lost, try again. Don't go beyond that. 3 times, really the max. And perhaps more importantly, if you ask me for directions, they may be off by as much as 180 degrees. So that's something to keep in mind while we're going forward. Now, Olivia did say to me, as we were talking about topics, she said she finds the current environment, especially about political polarization, interesting. So I just want to point out that normally people say, don't talk about politics and religion. Dan talked about religion. Now I'm talking about politics. What a morning we're having. Okay, this is actually obviously a very serious topic and one that confuses a lot of people. So the description, if you read it on the website, the first line said the founders made it intentionally complicated. They did this on purpose. They did this on purpose because the complicated nature, 3 branches of government, a bunch of systems of checks and balances, actually forces us to cooperate to get things done, which is an unusual concept in some people's minds today. This is a concept that is so well understood by people that, and at the same time frustrating people, Winston Churchill on the House of Commons floor actually once said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Now, whether he said that first or not, I don't know. He's the one who gets credit for it. And it is so true, because when you look at democracy and the way it's supposed to work, you find yourself saying this is incredibly inefficient, it just doesn't work for this reason or that reason. And you have people like Churchill saying, you're right, it is the absolute worst form of government except for all the others. Or, as my colleague at PFW, Ann Livshiz, said, hey, if you want efficient government, go with a dictatorship. They are so much more efficient. You might not like the outcome, though. So I would like to now start with a little bit of word association. We all know what this is, right? I say a word, you say the first word that pops in your head. I say something like day, you say. I say tall, you say. I say blue, you say. Well, there's a little less consistency on that. That one's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But we're going to do a little word association. And so this time, there's a word going to show up on the screen. I would like you to have a word in your head, but I'm going to start pointing at people. Who knows who I'm going to point at? There are a lot of you. So just, when I point your direction, yell out whatever word popped into your head. Okay, you ready? So if you would, everybody, deep cleansing breath. First word that pops in your mouth when you hear the word government, go. President. I'm pointing anywhere. Raina, yes, I'm pointing at you now. Static. That was 2 words, and static. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Democracy. Way in the back. Okay, Kurt, you're on camera, go ahead.
Voting.
Voting, all right. Somebody else standing in the back. Also 2 words, also 2 words. Here's what I would like you to do right now, though. For the word that was in your head or the words that you heard, other than Andy Downs, because this could hurt my feelings depending on how this goes, I would like you to ask yourself, do you think of that word as a positive word, a neutral word, or negative word? We do this all the time, right? You think about something and you automatically have a negative feeling or a positive feeling. So the word that was in your head, positive, neutral, or negative, how many of you had a positive word in your head? Look around. A few lonely individuals. Okay. How many of you had a neutral word in your head? Many, many more people. How many had a negative word in your head? Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay. It's what I do for a living, so it didn't hurt my feelings. That's okay. All right. Now, next word. So deep cleansing breath again. First word that pops in your head when you hear the word politics. Go. Okay. Discord, like a question? All right, that's fine.
News.
News. Shady? Okay. Shame or shady is what I heard, so either way. Somebody else with the baseball hat on. Divisive. Way in the back with your hand up. Schmoozy. Might not even be a word, but I like it. That's good. One more. Somebody else. Dysfunctional. Same deal as last time. Positive, neutral, or negative. How many of you, based on the words you heard, had a positive feeling? Wow. Okay. All right. That's fine. How many had a neutral feeling? Okay. And how many negative feeling? For those of you who are watching this on camera, I felt the breeze from all the hands that went up right then. But here's what I'm going to ask. If you had to define either of those terms, what would your definition be? And at this point, people are starting to think, I did not come to school today. No, I'm not going to give you a definition. Fortunately, I came with definitions. And so the first one, government, the institution and procedures through which a land and its people are ruled. If you think about it, most of our interactions with government, we sort of accept that there's going to be some awkwardness. We kind of accept the moment that we're going to join together as a community. Occasionally we're going to have rules we like, occasionally we're going to have rules we don't like, but in the end, it delivers services. So we have almost a neutral feeling toward government to some degree. Politics, though, is different, isn't it? These two definitions, I actually prefer the second one, mostly because it's easier for me to remember. But it's from a guy named Harold Laswell, and he said politics is how we decide who gets what, when, and how. Politics is how we decide who gets what, when, and how. So, quick question. Any of you ever have to get into a discussion with somebody about how you're going to decide who gets what, when, and how? Anyone ever involved in one of those discussions? Just as a case in point, I have 5 brothers and sisters. By the way, one of them lives in Philly, and her name is Nancy. She said she was going to watch this online after it was posted, so would you all please say hi to Nancy? Hi, Nancy. Thank you very much. 5 brothers and sisters, and the house we were living in originally only had 1 bathroom. You know what's a scarce resource in a house with 5 brothers and sisters, 6 of us kids and 2 parents? Bathroom. So we understood this concept very really. You do too. We all do this. We fight over scarce resources. So the question then is, if we are politicians, because we all are fighting over scarce resources, why do we have such a negative view of the word? That's the question. And I think there are a number of reasons for it, but they kind of come down to these couple of concepts. Number one, elected officials usually are dealing with problems that have a much larger scope than who gets to go into the bathroom first or last. They are dealing with issues like homelessness and economic development, and sometimes what people would consider to be trivial stuff like filling potholes. Those are very large in scope. So that's number one, and they cost a lot of money. Number two, they do their fighting out in public. So keep in mind the next time you're getting ready to criticize somebody for being a politician, you yourself are one of them. So maybe you should think a little bit about why they are doing what it is they're doing, and how does that equate to what you do in much the same set of circumstances. Just an interesting question to ask ourselves. Okay, so when Livy and I were talking, she said, oh, polarization is terrible. And the second line from the description of the talk was, it seems impossible for anything to get done because of partisan and ideological differences that are pushing us apart. Everybody agree this seems to be the case? All right, I'm going to challenge that conception for a moment. I'm certainly not going to say it's not true, but I'm going to challenge it for a second. First of all, this is a graph of party affiliation. Blue are people who say, yes, I'm a Democrat. Red are people who say, yes, I am a Republican. This comes from the nice folks at Gallup, and it runs back to 2004, so, long time ago, and then runs right up to May of this year. And if you look, these lines are actually pretty close together, which sort of suggests, yeah, we're divided. If the political parties really are divided, we are divided because these lines are so close together. It's not like there's a big majority someplace. Well, I want to point something out. This says without independence. When pollsters ask for party affiliation, here's how we do it. Do you consider yourself to be a Republican, Democrat, or independent? And if you say Republican or Democrat, then we say, do you consider yourself to be a strong or weak? Whichever. If you say independent, we say, do you lean D or R? And so there are times when we just throw everybody into either their leaning, weak, or strong affiliation, and you see a graphic like this. When we allow the response to be independent, it suddenly looks like this. What do you notice? Shockingly, yeah, D and R are still close together, but there is a trend line, one that is certainly on its way up, of independent. And so the question is, do the two political parties actually manage to represent people all that well if we have a growing percentage of the population saying, I'm not willing to say I am strongly one or the other? Certainly something for us to keep in mind. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things that are sort of the reality of politics. First of all, this is an oversimplification. So my colleagues who do this research will just sort of laugh at me for oversimplifying it. But here we go. Partisan campaigns or polarizing campaigns actually activate high partisan individuals. If I come out as a candidate and I talk about how awful the other side is, my supporters love it. Granted, the few people on the other side, because of course my positions are everybody's positions, they hate it, but we all get activated by it. And who gets turned off? Independent voters, that group of people who are not willing to say I'm firmly one side or the other. Now, this is where it gets cynical. If you are running for office and you look at the landscape and you realize you can win as long as you can activate that one party, why would you try to activate independents or people who lean in a direction? Because that's dangerous. They may not vote for you. It's cynical. It's an awful way to think of things, but campaigns are about winning. They're not about losing. So we have an awful lot of people who intentionally do this, which feeds into this idea of polarization. Not that there isn't polarization, but we have to recognize there may be a path out of it, perhaps. Couple of things for us to keep in mind. This comes from the nice folks at Pew Research Center. When we ask people about trust and distrust, one of the things, this is percentage of U.S. adults who believe America's trust in the federal government has been shrinking. 3/4 of us say yes. Trust in the federal government shrinking. Perhaps, more tragically, some would argue, almost 2/3 of us say that our trust in each other is actually going down. That's probably not a healthy sign for a community. And we do recognize that low trust makes it harder to solve problems. We don't trust the government, harder to solve a problem. We don't trust each other, harder to solve a problem. This is interesting because we recognize that what's happening is a problem. That's good in many respects. Now, if you don't like data, I want to show this quote. A friend of mine was in a meeting in Detroit, a public meeting in Detroit. The mayor of Detroit was being asked about what looked like just this crazy haphazard installation of bike lanes and bike paths throughout the city of Detroit. And he said, and remember, this is the elected mayor. He said, people are naturally suspicious of what the government does. They assume it is either conspiracy or chaos. I can tell you the vast majority of time, it's chaos. Remember, the system is complicated. It doesn't really work that well. But the chaos that we see then can be used to leverage our belief that government is dysfunctional and actually causes us to lose faith in government, which is problematic. Now let's take this a step further. The same poll asked people some other questions, so now it's percentage of US adults who have blank in the American people to blank. So do you have a great amount or a fair amount of trust that people will do certain things? And we have, 75% of us, a great or fair amount of belief that American people will report a serious local problem to authorities when they see it. Now, some of you are thinking, hey, that's pretty good, 75%. And some of you are thinking, 25% of the people aren't going to support or aren't going to report this complicated issue, this problem that they have seen. That seems to be a lack of civic engagement. By the way, I do want to quickly point out, honestly report their full income when paying taxes. 63% of us have a fair or great amount of confidence that's going to happen, which means a lot of us think each other are tax cheats. Normally at this point I would ask how many of you paid your Indiana use tax on your last tax statement, and at this point many people are thinking, what use tax? I'm not going to ask you to admit that by raising your hand because this is being recorded and that would be admitting a felony, and I'm not here to do that. Now, these are things that theoretically we should all believe in. There should be a great majority of folks agreeing with this. But let's come over here. Accept election results regardless of who wins. A simple majority, 53% of us, have a great or fair amount of faith that people will accept election results. The moment that we start doubting election results feeds into our doubt of the legitimacy of the government, the work that it's doing, and we see a cycle of things going on. And we don't think that people are going to get informed about the issues before they go vote, which is even worse. So now you have people who are uninformed going out to vote. But that's okay, don't worry, because most of us don't think someone's going to go cast a vote anyway. Remember, we just finished a city election here where 30% of the registered voters showed up, and those of us who follow the stuff are like, wow, really good. That means 70% of them didn't show up. And by the way, not everyone who can be registered is registered to vote. Well, information might be the key to how we address our problems, and it seem like it should be easy to do this. It's easier than ever to access information, but it's also easier than ever to spread disinformation. So let's think about this for a second, but I have to confess something first. I occasionally talk with people about running for office. I do this in a nonpartisan way. I don't give strategic advice. But one of the things I tell people is answer the question you want to answer, not the question that was asked. Think about the number of times you have listened to a candidate who didn't even come close to answering the question that was asked, but they delivered their message. They're all on me. Every single one of them is on me. I would like to clarify one thing. I do tell them that the answer should be mildly relevant to the question. So if you ask someone about garbage collection and they talk about Syria, not doing what I told them to do, just a case in point. Okay, once again, back to Pew Research. Nearly 2/3 of adults find it hard to tell what's true when an elected official is talking. It is so easy to find data that supports your position. As my dad used to say to me, sometimes people go to data for the same reason a drunk goes to a lamppost, not for enlightenment, but support. That's all they're looking for. They just want to make sure they have support. And so when you think about it, almost 2/3 of us find it hard to figure out whether there is truth coming out of the mouths of elected officials. 40+% of us when we're watching cable news, when we're using social media, almost half of us, this is problematic. In part because journalism, as a lot of us understood it, really has only been around about 100 years. About 1920-ish was when modern journalism began. And we could believe journalists when they reported things because they followed certain standards. You need multiple sources to confirm something before you can publish it. You're not supposed to use unnamed sources unless you have actually even more support for that than the normal standard of 2. I mean, all these rules existed, and they did the filtering. They took care of the bad stuff. That was wonderful, except now we can present information so easily. I can create andysdailyrant.com so easily, and it might not be any good. You would not know until you actually started to look into it. So here is what I ask you to do. Trust but verify. I always like to start as a friendly person, then not after that. So trust but verify. Those of you who don't know, A Christmas Story, the movie A Christmas Story, you know the movie? I think they've already started showing it already someplace. But anyway, that's based on a series of short stories by a guy named Gene Shepard, who was originally from Indiana. So there's your bit of Hoosier trivia for the day. Here are a couple of statements that I think drive home this point about trust but verify. There are three kinds of lies, right? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's the first one. Henry Ward Beecher was a preacher who did a lot of his preaching here in the state of Indiana. He said even a liar tells 100 truths to one lie. He has to make the lie good for anything. So there's always going to be some element of truth to what people are saying. If there is no truth to it, we know to dismiss it right away. And that's where we run into trouble. And then, of course, Kurt Vonnegut, another Hoosier for you. People need good lies. There are too many bad ones out there already. Now, here's what I ask you to do. When you're looking at information, is the source cited? If someone says, well, a poll says, blah, whatever, did they tell you where the poll came from? Can you go find it? If they did not, keep in mind sometimes we have limitations. Like right now, I'm close to going over my time limit for you all. So, I have limitations. I can't cite everything I'm supposed to do. But it should be possible to find information. That's first of all, is it cited? Secondly, what kind of source is it? .gov, hey, I got to tell you, government data quite often is unbelievably flawed, but also the best available data. The census, best count of all people, also incredibly flawed. So we have to keep this in mind. Academic institutions, of course, since I come from one, I have to say we're all wonderful. Academic institutions, when we are saying stuff, theoretically, it's based on our knowledge, our data, our information. So that's, we sort of trust us a little bit more than maybe andysdailyrant.com. Think tanks have a bias, obviously. We can find out about the bias, but they typically use good methodology, so that's important to know. And then there are other things out there that become difficult to understand. I have students all the time now who find sources. I spend more time looking at the sources students use now than actually reading the paper. I shouldn't say that. None of my students are here, so I'm going to say it. What the heck? And that's because they're using sources that aren't naturally identifiable as good. And so I actually have to go look at the source. Is it good or not? And then I have to explain to the students afterwards, this is why your source was not good. And so it's an educational moment. That's good. That's what I do. But that's important. And then finally, are other people using it? If something is cited only once, that might be brand new. Great. But if something's been around for a while and no one's citing it, there might be a problem with it. I'm not saying there is. There might be. In other words, we have to develop the skills we relied on journalists to do for us many years ago. And there are a couple ways to do this. Actually go to the original source yourself. That's great. But things like fact check and PolitiFact, I know a lot of people will say these are left-leaning, they don't like them. But actually they do verify what was said and sources. You may not like that they check more Republican statements than Democratic statements, but the methodology is good. And then there are actually some other versions of this at the national, state, and local level. In fact, I will point out that during, I believe it was the State of the Union, the nice folks at National Public Radio actually had the transcript going during the speech, and it was annotated. So when things were said, and they've done this for a while, this is not something brand new, they were actually doing the fact-checking for you while you were listening to the speech, or if you were me, listening to the speech and reading the thing the next day because I couldn't sit through all the applause that happens during the State of the Union address. So, thank you, NPR, for doing that. Also ask yourself what's missing. As I mentioned a moment ago, everybody has limitations. News outlets have limitations. Only so many column inches, only so many minutes in a broadcast. In 2010, a couple of folks at a university looked at all of the news broadcasts in the upper Midwest, and they broke down every one of them by time. So a 30-minute news broadcast is not really 30 minutes. There's a shocker to you. First, you take out the commercials. Then you take out the teasers. Hey, when we come back, we're going to talk about... You take out all that stuff, and you get down to something that in some instances is single digits worth of coverage of news in terms of minutes. So that's a limitation, obviously. Also, and this is one of my favorite, balanced reporting does not mean equal number of seconds. I had a reporter once say to me, oh, we're getting ready to do this report. It's great, it's really balanced. I said, oh, what's that mean? And he said, well, each candidate's yard sign is on the screen for the exact same number of seconds. And I said, that's balanced? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. Keep that in mind. Quite often, we address this by actually acknowledging what we're not able to do. And that's important for us to do. We do this as academics all the time. I don't have time to get into all this research. Here's another line of research we should go down. Folks who are giving talks, etc., they should do this as well. And then finally, the Columbia Journalism Review actually pointed out that we have all this time we spend on bias and measuring it. Maybe we're wasting our time. Maybe instead we should just accept there is bias and read things knowing that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. So here's a quick version of this. You all get ready to do your own spinning, so to speak. If a city has $2.5 million in reserve, they expect $25 million in revenue, and they put together a budget that is $25.5 million, is it a balanced budget or not? Who says it is a balanced budget? Who said it's not a balanced budget? Who's not answering the question? There was no C as an answer here. It was only A and B. Now, obviously, for some people, deficit if revenue is exceeded by expenditures. Not a balanced budget. Other people, no. Throw the surplus in there because that is an existing asset. Both legitimate arguments, aren't they? Now we can argue about how large your reserve has to be, all these other sorts of things, but both are valid, and it's important that we recognize the validity of other positions, if for no other reason than trying to understand them. And that brings me to the final point. So how can we find our way in this system? What can we do? And there are a couple of things. First of all, we can be a little concerned that when people are asked, what's the biggest problem that we have? How likely are we to address it? Percentage of adults who say each is a very big problem, 25% said it's a very big problem that we don't have faith in each other. And 41% said confidence in the federal government to address stuff. In other words, the elected officials aren't getting the message from us yet that this is a big problem. So they're not going to address it because there's a limited number of resources and an unlimited number of problems. But if we keep in mind what education is, these are some of my favorite quotes about education. I've thrown Wilkie in there because he's from the state of Indiana, and I do a lot of Indiana stuff. But let's start with Aristotle. The mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. What a fabulous concept. That's what we should be trying to do. And so if we take this a little bit further and recognize the world is nothing but gray, this becomes a lot easier. And instead of simply saying right or wrong, ask people what's the trade-off. If we go down your road, what are we not able to do? To use the economic terms, what are the opportunity costs? To use the deliberative discussion terminology, what are the trade-offs? And there should be an ability to explain what those are. But if we haven't thought about it, we need to think through it ourselves. That's fine. That's part of deliberation. It's part of discussion. That's what we should be trying to do. If we do this well, if we start looking for where we have agreement, we actually end up in a position where we're able to say, we as a community, we as a state, as a country, etc., value X. We might have disagreements about which trade-offs are most important if we go for X, but we're able to at least state that, and that's a good thing. And so, I'm going to challenge all of you to actually become facilitators instead of active combatants in discussion. And here's what I mean by that. Start with neutrality. Don't walk in saying, I'm right, you're wrong. Go in saying, I want to understand. I'm going to start out neutral. I don't have a position on this, especially if it's a group discussion. Keep the discussion on the approaches. What is it you hope to accomplish? If we do that, what do we gain or lose? Because remember, limited number of resources, unlimited number of problems. Politics is how we decide who gets what, when, and how. So this is all important stuff for us. And then encourage everyone to participate. My students hate this. I always tell them there's no participation grade. You can sit quietly if you wish, and then I call on them. Sorry, it's just going to happen, some more than others. But the idea here is I want to hear from people. I want to listen to what you have to say. That's one of the keys to understanding. And if we take this a little bit further and we actually begin asking for clarification, what do you mean by that? We find ourselves in a position where sometimes we force them to think a little more about what they want to do, which is good for them and for us. Because eventually we maybe find a little more agreement. Because once we understand what they're trying to accomplish, it's easier for us to understand that and maybe even appreciate it as an end goal. Admittedly, when we do this, there will be uncomfortable moments. Just warning you now, remember religion and politics, two things you don't talk about. Dan and I took care of that. We're talking about them anyway. So you enter what the people who teach this stuff call the groan zone. I hate that terminology, but they use it, so I'm going with it. The groan zone. This is where people are suddenly aware, oh my gosh, not everyone agrees with me. I thought we had the same position on stuff, but because we're digging deeper and we're going for trade-offs and things, people start to realize, wait a minute, we did not agree. And this is interesting because when we facilitate discussions, you will have couples who think they are completely aligned. And partway through, you start to think, I know the name of a good divorce attorney. If we're lucky, they get through that, though, and that's what we're really trying for. If this goes well, we find convergence, and even if we don't, we at least understand the position. And that's really what we should be trying to do. So once again, I'm the director of the Mike Down Center for Indiana Politics at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. It's a nonpartisan organization. Our goal is to help people understand politics and government, and we hope that if we do this well, you all will decide to participate. There's contact information for me, and I believe Kara told me I should be ready to take questions from people. So, question time. You need this?
Sure. All right, guys, quick round of applause for Andy Down.
Thank you.
All right. Questions? Yes.
What gives you hope being in this business as long as you have?
What gives me hope is the question. Absolutely nothing. I'm distraught. This is it today. I'm done after this. Now, a couple of things give me hope. Being at a university, one of the wonderful things is the students all stay the same age. And they come in with energy and excitement and belief that things can change. And in the long haul, we see things do change, and it can do change. And so I get to see that every semester, every year, and that actually helps to give me hope. Also, if you actually facilitate discussions, you can get hope from that as well, because you do realize we're maybe not as far apart as we thought. Don't get me wrong, hyperpolarization going on in certain ways right now. But remember, number of independents going up, percentage of independents going up. People are looking to find ways to cooperate. We understand that's how we get things done. So that's where I find hope.
Yes.
What do you tell would-be candidates is a good criteria for wanting to run for office? What's a good reason for wanting to run?
What's a good reason to run for office? I actually give people a number of them. I think it's actually okay to say, I need a job. And there are some political jobs are full-time, so if someone wants to try and earn that job and go through a hiring process every 4 years, more power to them. Probably not the best argument to make to voters. But it can be your motivation. Beyond that, then it becomes a number of things. It can be, I'm angry about something that's going on. It could be, well, I want to run for this office, but I'm going to run for these offices on my way there. Those are all fine. What I can say is, over the years, having spoken with hundreds of candidates for office, what drives most of them is they really do want to make their place better. Whether that's a township, a school district, city, whatever. They want to make their place better. And you can disagree with how they want to do that, but that's really where they start. And that actually is another reason that I have hope. I talk to people over and over again. Their belief is they think they can make it better.
Great. I saw another hand over here.
In today's political landscape, do you feel we're at a turning point of where we plan on going, or where our founders kind of saw us going? Do you feel we're at a turning point at this moment in time?
Are we at a turning point? Even if I said yes, there are factors that will make that turning point maybe not what a lot of people are looking for. And here's what I mean by that. We have two major political parties right now. And it is very difficult for a third party to get any sort of traction for a bunch of reasons, much of which are institutional. Beyond that, though, you and me as voters, when we go in to vote, we may have really been inspired by a libertarian candidate or a green or an independent. And when we look at, oh yeah, I'm voting for so-and-so. And then you get in there and you realize they're not going to win. So you do what everybody does and you go, I guess this one's closer to me, and you pick one of the two major political parties. That's unfortunately part of what happens. Now, what is actually not necessarily a bad thing is that slowly but surely the political parties recognize when they are out of step. And so when a third party emerges or a candidate emerges on a particular issue, eventually what the parties do is sort of reach out and grab that issue and bring it in. So when I said campaigns are about winning, They also sometimes are about making sure that a message is getting delivered or an issue is getting discussed. And the two major parties realize, wait a minute, if we want to win, we better change our position or start talking about that issue, kind of bring people into it. So, turning point, yes. Will that mean there's going to be a new political party? Probably not. But that does not mean that there won't be a shift in what happens. In fact, there are people who study what's called de-alignment and realignment of political parties. They write articles about how this has happened. For those of you who were listening, once again, shameless plug for NPR. Those of you who are listening to WBOI this morning, this is the 40th anniversary of Morning Edition. So they've been doing all these things from 40 years ago. And they actually did a history about race relations this morning and demonstrated that, for example, the position on immigration, the two major parties have sort of shifted their positions on immigration just in the last 40 years. Not that we really noticed that because we're living today and not necessarily paying attention to 40 years ago.
Last question.
Going off that, like people swaying their opinions, how much, if someone's running for office, how much do you think their values are based on like innate, authentic values, and how much is like based on performing the role of the party? Because I feel like a lot of people will switch their opinion based on the party they're running for.
Yeah. I have to go down two roads here. The first one is, if you live in a community that's dominated by a particular party, there are folks who become a dino or a rhino, a Democrat in name only or a Republican in name only, because that's the party that wins. And they're like, you know what, I'm a moderate, but I want to run for office and I want to win, so I guess today I'm going to say I'm blank. But keep in mind, no one is fully in alignment with their political party. And even when the rhinos and dinos come out, their authenticness is still there for the vast majority of what they're going to talk about. The same way most votes are supermajority or unanimous. You know, the divisiveness is actually a fairly small number of issues. So that's part of it. The second road that I think we have to go down is something that an elected official once told me. He said when he got elected, he held a few offices, he had very specific beliefs about a number of things. And that's what he would advocate for. He believed he had to convince you as a voter he was right on stuff. But he said for other stuff, and keep in mind elected officials deal with a plethora of issues, there's some stuff he's just going to go with what a poll tells him or what the party tells him because A, he doesn't care, or it doesn't seem like it's that important in his district. So I think those are the two things to keep in mind. Number one, sometimes you have to. If you want to get elected, you've got to pretend you're a member of a party. Number two, they don't have opinions on all the issues, and so sometimes it's easier just to default.
All right. I think we're about out of time today, but one more round of applause for Amy.